The Golden Age, the dream of a land of perfection that has haunted men since the beginnings of civilization, took on a special poignancy and urgency in the Romantic Age. For the 19th century in Europe was also the age of rapid industrialization, of steam and soot and machines that threatened to replace liberty with progress. In England, France, and Germany, artists tried to return to an age that was less complicated, less compromised, less cluttered than their own. The models for this ideal world were various, but all were long past. The classical world of Greece and Rome, the fantasy medieval world of chivalry and troubadours, the world of folklore and legend. But the most potent model of perfect innocence and clarity was a world lodged deep in all of us, the world of childhood.
His parents were already in bed and asleep. The clock ticked its monotonous rhythm. The young man lay uneasily on his couch. "It's not material treasures which have awakened such a powerful longing in me," he said to himself. "I'm far removed from any avarice, but I long to look on the blue flower. It fills my senses ceaselessly, and I can think and breathe nothing else. I have never felt like this before. It's like a dream, as if I had dozed off into another world. For who cares about flowers in the world that I inhabit? I've never before heard of such singular passion for a flower. I would have believed I was going mad, but I saw and thought things with such amazing lucidity. Since then I have felt that I can understand things more easily. I once heard talk of times gone past, how animals and trees and rocks communicated with man. It now seems to me that they could start speaking at any moment, and I know what it is they want to say to me. But there must be many words I do not know. If I only knew more, I would be able to comprehend still more easily. Once I loved dancing. Now I would rather think of the music." The boy gradually lost himself in sweet fantasies and fell asleep. He dreamed of far-off, wild, and undiscovered regions. He seemed to wander over the sea with inexplicable ease. All emotions rose within him to an unprecedented peak. He lived a wonderfully colorful life. He died and came back to life. He loved with the deepest passion and was then separated forever from his loved ones. Finally, towards morning, as dawn broke, his soul became calm, and the images more clear and more enduring.
Thus begins the novel which Novalis never completed, called Heinrich von Ofterdingen. In it, Novalis depicts the life of a young dreamer and his intangible yearning. The blue flower for which he longs becomes a symbol of romanticism. It is a longing for those things which lie on the other side of the boundaries of everyday life. To the question, "Where are we going?" Ofterdingen replies, "Always home." In this age of upheaval, there emerged a feeling of longing for the realm of peace, a dream of a golden age, which it was felt must have existed before and would surely come again. A new morning, a golden childhood.
Childhood tranquility, heavenly calm. How often I stand dumb before you in loving contemplation and wish to think back to you. But it seems we can only conceive of what was once bad and then was made good again. We have no conception of childlike innocence. When I was a silent child and knew nothing of the facts of our lives, I still knew no less than now. Despite all the heartache, the pondering, and the struggling. The child is whole within himself, and is thus beautiful. The power of laws and destiny do not burden him. He personifies freedom. He knows peace. He has not destroyed it himself. He has riches. He holds it in his heart and knows not the shabbiness of life. He is immortal because he knows nothing of death.
The German writer Hölderlin foundered, like so many romantics, because he had driven himself too far in his search for a lost paradise. He spent the last decades of his life alone in his attic room in Tübingen. There was talk that he was mentally deranged. In the piece that he found there, he wrote,
"Beauty is for children alone. It is perhaps the image of God himself. Tranquility is theirs, and still the angel stretches out to praise."
Robert Schumann's graceful miniatures for piano, Kinderscenen, scenes of childhood, reveal nothing of the misery and mental illness which he encountered at the end of his life.
That is the way to true life. Stay a child, for only a child is capable of the most profound love.
So wrote Philipp Otto Runge, painter of the most intense images of children of the Romantic period.
We cannot retrieve unity within ourselves until we return to the primary warmth and intimacy of feeling, until we are transformed back into children.
The vision of a human utopia is set against a background of great turmoil and industrial upheaval. The machine age was dawning. Runge wrote in a letter,
We live in a confused, sad, terrible age. He who keeps beauty and good lovingly within his heart will always reach his goal. We must try to be like children again if we want to achieve the best.
At only 33 years of age, Runge dies of consumption. His next project was to be the illustration of a new series of children's tales. The romantic yearning leads its exponents over mountains and across seas to far-off lands, in fiction and in fact. Greece is a favorite destination, but whereas an earlier generation had seen Greece as the fount of correct design, correct art, and attempted in their own time to reconstruct the purity and strength of classical culture in its prime, the Romantic sees ruins. He sees the remnants of greatness, the grave of the golden age on earth. These fragments are not, for him, pointers to a vigorous future, but lie steeped in gentle melancholy. They signal the world's harsh victory over dreams of perfection. The German writer Hölderlin, who had experienced Greece only in his imagination, with the aid of engravings like these from a French travelogue, writes,
"One of my most fervent dreams is to go there one day, to see the divine grave of the youth of mankind."
For the English at least, Greek dreams were soon to be fueled by more than travelogues or imagination. Lord Elgin used his diplomatic weight in Greece to achieve his lifetime's dream, to bring glorious fragments from the Parthenon frieze to London. The Turks, then occupying Greece, had been using them as target practice. The arrival of the Elgin marbles at the British Museum had a profound effect on English artists, mocking modern times with their lucid grandeur. The Bavarian king, Ludwig I, had his own version of the Acropolis built in Munich, in which the monarch housed his collection of ancient treasures. The fashion for Greek-style temples in the building of the time is reflected in Sir Robert Smirke's design for the British Museum.
There should be temples where one can revere the great artists as the highest mortal beings, where one can be bathed in calm, silent humility and uplifting solitude. I compare the most noble works of art with prayer.
Thus wrote the early German romantic Heinrich Wackenroder in 1797. From this idea of creating a holy setting for the display of works of art came a number of great museums of the period. Even when we look at the classical facades of the Pantheon or the Madeleine in Paris, we should consider them rather as examples of romantic classicism, for they invoke a romantic view of a distant Greece in modern cities. Goethe wrote of seeking the land of the Greeks with my soul while he was on his Italian journey.
I hope that on this journey my heart will be calmed by fine arts, that art's heavenly image will imprint itself on my soul and remain there to peacefully delight it. For the age of beauty is gone. Only need and harsh necessity govern our days.
Goethe wrote these words during his Italian journey of 1786. It is a clear presentiment of a change to come. 3 years later, the French Revolution exploded. Goethe was not the first to travel to Italy. Since the 18th century, Rome had been the ideal city of education for the northerners who went there seeking art, enjoyment, and nature. The Italian journey emerges as a central theme in the German Romantic writings of the period, most notably in novels and tales. Starting with Sternbull's Wanderungen by Ludwig Tieck and continuing up to Eichendorff's novel, translated as From the Life of a Good-for-Nothing. For those on their first grand tour, the countryside along the Via Appia, leading to Rome, is considered a significant goal. Yet it is not only Germans who travelled this route. In his epic poem, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, Byron celebrates the eternal city.
O Rome, my country, city of the soul, the orphans of the heart must turn to thee, lone mother of dead empires, and control in their shut breasts their petty misery. What are our woes and sufferings? Come and see the cypress, hear the owl, and plod your way o'er steps of broken thrones and temples, ye whose agonies are evils of a day. A world is at our feet, as fragile as our clay. Cypress and ivy, weed and wallflower, grown, matted and massed together. Hillocks heaped on what were chambers, arch crushed, columns strewn in fragments, choked up vaults, and frescoes steeped in subterranean damps where the owl peeped, deeming it midnight. Temples, baths, or halls, pronounce who can, for all that learning reaped from her research hath been, that these are walls. Behold the imperial mount. 'Tis thus the mighty falls. Tully was not so eloquent as thou, thou nameless column with the buried base. What are the laurels of the Caesar's brow? Crown me with ivy from his dwelling place. Whose arch or pillar meets me in the face, Titus or Trajan's? No, 'tis that of time. Triumph, arch, pillar, all he doth displace, scoffing. And apostolic statues climb to crush the imperial urn, whose ashes slept sublime.
The mesmeric melancholy of ruins casts its spell over English painters too. Byron's How Are the Mighty Fallen could serve as a title for Turner's painting of the Forum in Rome. But for others, the dream of a golden age becomes the quest to make of that dream reality. In Rome, not far from the Spanish Steps, settles a group of young German artists recently expelled from the Vienna Academy of Art. They called themselves the Lucas Brothers. From 1810, they take over the empty Franciscan monastery of St. Isidoro, turning the former refectory into a communal studio. The name Nazarenes, by which the group becomes known, was at first a mocking nickname. They are also dubbed the Pre-Raphaelites. They want to go back in time, to return to an Italy of more than 500 years ago. Friedrich Overbeck paints Italy and Germany. The group seeks to unite the two cultures. The Roman Marquis Massimo commissions the group to decorate 3 rooms of his town villa. His orders are precise. The murals are to pay tribute to the great Italian artistic heritage. So the right-hand room is dedicated to Tasso and his great work, the liberated Jerusalem. In the center, the call to the First Crusade is shown. On the ceiling, Overbeck paints, in delicate colors, lyrical episodes from epic poems. The whole cycle demonstrates the love of storytelling typical of the Nazarenes. Overbeck once stated that he wished to preach through his paintings.
For me, art is like the harp of David, on which I long to play psalms to the praise of our Lord.
The Nazarenes try to draw on the strength of Christian belief to create a new approach to art, built on ancient foundations. They do not limit themselves to religious themes, but profane or religious, the world they depict is a world based on the past and protected from the present. Artists and designers, the Golden Age finds an alternative source to Greece in the exotic minarets and pagodas of the mysterious East. They turn the Orient into a treasure chest of frivolous, whimsical, and wholly delightful shapes and colors. Incongruity is positively welcomed. European parks sprout Chinese pagodas and Indian palaces. The more mixed in origin, the better. The most enchanting example of this fairy tale version of the Golden Age is an Indian-style royal pavilion in Brighton, England. The Prince Regent, later to become King George IV of England, commanded the designer Humphrey Repton to design for him a new pavilion. Repton declared his intent
to combine from the architecture of Hindustan such forms as might be rendered applicable to the purpose.
The money ran out, and it was left to the architect John Nash some 15 years later to realize Repton's plans, and steal the credit too. The pavilion was finally unveiled in dazzling splendor in 1821, complete with the new gas lighting. Countless domes, towers and minarets, together with the ornate facade, make of the pavilion a building redolent of an eastern fairy tale, magically transported to England's southern coast. The exterior and interior cheerfully quote from a number of disparate styles, countries and periods without a hiccup. Outside, the visitor is encouraged to think himself in India. Inside, and he is a time traveler in China. The lotus flower lights opposite the Chinese banqueting hall provide a smooth and luminous transition. Similarly, with the great dome of the main hall, the vast lights are supported by a Chinese dragon over which sway painted coppery mock banana leaves. Eastern legend colored not only English buildings of the time, but paintings too. A Persian legend is the theme of this dramatic work by the apocalyptic painter John Martin, titled Sedak in Search of the Waters of Oblivion. The Waters of Oblivion. The phrase has an archaic and mysterious air that we find again in the English paintings of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Like the Nazarenes at the beginning of the century, the Pre-Raphaelites are young and united in their rejection of the modern world. Like the Nazarenes, they believe that the source of a better art, a better life, lies in a return to the clear forms and haunting legends of medieval Europe. They retreat to a time when the world was young, peopled with gallant knights and gentle ladies and charmed castles and cursed forests. Founded in 1841 by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, the group includes the painters Millet and Holman Hunt. Soon they are joined by William Morris, the great author, designer, and radical, and the painter Edward Burne-Jones. Their subject matter is religious or mystical, and invariably medieval in feeling. But the settings for these rich mixtures of symbol, allegory, and myth were the landscapes of England. But this is an England seen with a mystical and visionary intensity. Every sapling and butterfly and rainbow, lovingly and glowingly rendered. Their paintings have about them a dreamlike precision. Burne-Jones writes to his father about a walk in Oxford as though he had stepped into a medieval tapestry.
The day has gone down magnificently. All by the river's side I came back in a delirium of joy. The land was so enchanted with bright colours, blue and purple in the sky, shot over with a dust of golden shower, and in the water a mirrored counterpart ruffled by a light west wind. And in my mind, pictures of the old days, the abbey, and long croziers, gay knights and ladies by the riverbank, hawking parties, and all the pageantry of the golden age. And then the sound of earthly bells in the distance, and presently the wreathing of steam upon the trees where the railway runs, called me back to the years I cannot convince myself of living in.
From this kind of mix of observation and fantasy, reality and make-believe, the Pre-Raphaelites composed their haunting vision of the Golden Age.
The curtain has been lifted, and we had a glimpse into a twilight world of dark, mysterious woodlands, haunted streams, meads of dark green starred with burning flowers, veiled in a dim, mystic light, and stained with low-toned crimson and gold.
This is perhaps the last fling of the Romantics yearning for a somewhere else before the soot-caked, machine-powered reality takes over. All over Europe, the search for a golden age leads the Romantics to look back into the past. In Germany, Tieck and Wackenroder, while they were still Berlin students, discover the Bavarian town of Nuremberg, where progress seems to have stood still since the Middle Ages. The 24-year-old Wackenroder expresses his admiration by publishing a series of essays which pay homage to the century of Albrecht Dürer. The Romantic conception of the Middle Ages, a period which they consider to extend to the 16th century, was in fact highly idealistic, a utopia far removed from the grim reality.
Those were fine, sparkling times, when Europe was Christian, when one Christianity dominated this man-made part of the world, when one profound common interest united the most distant provinces of this vast spiritual empire. Devoid of material wealth, one leader brought together the greatest political powers. How happily man could go about his earthly tasks, secure in the fact that these holy beings had prepared the future and that every misdeed would be forgiven by them. They preach nothing more than love of the Holy Mother of Christianity, who forgives with divine power and is ready to save any believer from the most fearful danger.
Thus Novalis begins his essay entitled Christianity or Europe. This unity was destroyed in the view of many Romantics by Luther and Protestantism. Novalis felt that only religion could reawaken Europe and give the people security, and that Christianity should be restored to its former position of influence. Monastery Ruins by Caspar David Friedrich. Cologne proffered a concrete example of this religious revival during the period. Around the middle of the 13th century, the city had begun work on a vast cathedral, which in the following centuries could not be completed. It remained a fragment until the Romantic era. In an ambitious work, Salpêze-Boisserie published the original plans, thus engendering the impetus to complete it. Crown Prince Friedrich Wilhelm of Prussia became enthused by the idea. The state promised financial support, and following the confusions of the Napoleonic era, the prince viewed its completion as a significant national task. The Prussian king Friedrich Wilhelm IV utters these memorable words at the laying of the foundation stone in 1842.
I pray to God that this cathedral of Cologne will soar above this city and above Germany until the end of days.
At the site of a Gothic cathedral, Achim von Arnim writes,
"What unity connects everything on earth with the sky, leading to heaven? The church reaches to heaven like praying hands. Countless flowers and rows of sublime paintings lead on to the cross, which is the apogee of the building, representing the end of heavenly life on earth."
The work on the Cologne Cathedral lasted until 1880. The rediscovered Gothic style dominated church architecture of the period. The revival of Gothic forms came to Germany from England, whereas on the continent Gothic had been erased by the Renaissance, Baroque and Rococo. In Britain, it had never been entirely interrupted. People were familiar with the late Gothic style and nobody objected to this style being used for lay buildings. The most famous of these is the Houses of Parliament in London. In 1836, the architect Charles Barry won the commission for the rebuilding of Parliament, which had been destroyed by fire 2 years earlier. The project continued over decades, but the original concept remained unchanged. The building is in every respect harmonious. The horizontal and vertical lines stand in fine contrasts. The rich details do not stand apart from each other, nor do they detract from the general impression. This profane new Gothic had begun in England around 1750, before the onset of the Romantic period. The manor house of writer Horace Walpole was an early example. And here we see the plans for Fonthill Abbey. The proto-romantic William Beckford apparently wanted to top this by lending his Wiltshire house the appearance of a vast monastery. But bad building and a bolt of lightning reduced it to rubble. Germany provides a contrast. A Hessen prince built a castle ruin in the park of Wilhelmshohe. He tried to evoke the secret world of a distant past. Yet other sources for the spirit of the past are discovered in the fairy tales and fables handed down by oral tradition from generation to generation. The preservation of these tales is seen as a vital task by the Brothers Grimm, who make a collection of them to save them from extinction. It was a world where good always triumphs, a world inhabited by happy princes and beautiful princesses. They live in imposing castles and the populace gazes up at them respectfully. In the late 19th century, long after the feudal era had finally come to an end, the Bavarian King Ludwig II still dreams of the glorious days of emperors and kings. Ludwig models his life on the Sun King, Louis XIV. It is a fairy tale dream akin to the story of Cinderella, when the pumpkin gets her to the ball and she meets the prince who lays his kingdom at her feet. In the later phase of Romanticism, the pictures of Moritz von Schwind seem to speak of days gone by with a contemplative air. But following Napoleonic domination, Germans long not only for comfortable, idyllic peace, but also for a revived national consciousness. Heidelberg becomes the center of the so-called late Romantics, Eichendorff, Arnim, and Brentano. They all have more or less the same intention: to rebuild the national consciousness of Germany, aided by the poetic spirit of the people, which they sense still remains from times gone by. Thus, as the brothers Grimm begin to collect fairy tales from 1812 onwards, so Arnim and Brentano make a collection of old German folk songs and publish them under the title Des Knaben Wunderhorn. Heinrich Heine's popular Song of the Lorelei seems to encapsulate the esoteric religious sentiment of the early Romantics like Novalis, as well as the folkloric national character of the later Heidelberg era.
Ein Regen sei, ein Regen aus den Wolken, wohl in das Grüne.
I don't know why I feel so sad. I just can't seem to forget a tale from olden times.
Und scheinst du, liebe Sonn, mit Wald, so wieset als im grünen Wald, und all die müden Blumen, die haben müden Ton. Es geht eine dunkle Wolke herein, es soll und muss geschieden sein. Ade, fein.
In their search for eternity, the German Romantics discover something essential for the German people, a mythology of their own which draws on the ancient powers of the fatherland, but which is soon surmounted by religion, just as in ancient mythology. Around the middle of the 18th century, copies of the great epics like Parzival and the Nibelungenlied come to light again. And though sleeping princesses, gingerbread houses, were part of the romantic armory that is now good only for fairy tales. But the Golden Age made at least one major contribution to the art that came after. The dream of simplicity typified in German art by the Nazarenes and their frescoes opened the way to the appreciation by Western artists of the work of other cultures that had before this date been dismissed as primitive. After the Romantics, primitive became a word of approval. The art of Africa, of Tahiti, and the folk art of Russia became key agents in the development of the art of our own century. Going back was, in the end, a way of going forward.